Hi everyone. I'm going to take you through some of the things that I do when I'm making a bag. The most important thing is just getting everything prepared ready, but I want to just start with just talking about interfacing. You hear things like fusible interfacing, fusible foam. There's loads of different types. So what I've done is lined the ones up that I use, and then I can take you through what their uses are and why I use them. This first one is just lightweight interfacing. You can see it's quite floppy, almost like a tissue paper. What this is really good for is on cottons, like a single cotton. It just helps to keep the seams from starting to shred, and does give a bit of structure. It's single-sided, so it's quite soft on this side. But if I turn it over and zoom in, you can see there's like bubbles. That's the tiny little glue dots, and when you fuse that by ironing onto the fabric, you iron it with the bubbles down, and that will very gently melt into the fabric, and that helps it to fuse. But as you can see, it's really thin stuff, but I use this all the time on any cotton fabric. The next one is more of a heavyweight fusible interfacing. It's more like a card. I mean, you can hear it. It's got a shiny side and then a dull side. This is really good because you can that will stand up, and if you fuse that to a cotton, it means you can make more 3D makes with this. So if you were making a tube or something as simple as a pen holder, you can use this type of interfacing. So this is heavyweight, and it just helps with providing structure. The shiny side is your glue side. So you would put your fabric down, you'd put this on top, and then you would just iron it on. I always use a silk setting on my iron. You can always turn the heat up a little bit. Don't put the heat on too much because it will melt. So I found that a silk level on the iron is perfect for ironing this on. I don't use that very often unless I was making something that I wanted to be quite firm, quite rigid. The next thing is it's more like a batting. It's like a felt type batting. You can see it's got quite a fluffy inner layer. I think this is used for quilts, and you can embroider onto this as well. It has a soft side on one side, and then you can see those heat bubbles again. So that's the side that you would iron on. But if I turn it, you can see it's quite thick. I mean, it does squidge under a machine. That will squidge down, so it doesn't affect your sewing at all. But you can see, if I try and zoom in, you can see it's got this fluffy type of layer in the center. I've used it to make a baby quilt, so it is really good. It's thick, but it squidges as well, so this is good. I don't use this so much in bags, unless I wanted to make one really soft but thick, if that makes sense. The next one, my recent recommendation from people, is something called R foam. Now this is a foam. You can see how thick that foam is. It does squidge as well, so it doesn't cause that much bulk in seam allowances. And this is double-sided fusible foam. This is really good for bags because it is flexible. It does bend. You can shape it. It's strong enough to stand up. This one will just fall down, but you can see how that would create quite a lot of structure in a bag. I do use this on bags as well. Because it's a double-sided fuse, you have to try and line up your fabric perfectly. On the bottom, you put your fabric down, you would put this on, and then you'd put fabric on the top and fuse both at the same time. It can be tricky. If you only want to fuse one side and you make the same mistake as I did and buy double-sided foam, that will stick to your iron, and that will cause all manner of problems on your iron. You can wash the iron off, but if you don't want to double-side fuse at the same time, then you could get single-sided fuse. I have bought some single-sided fuse, so this is called Bosal in our foam. It is single-sided, but you can see it can make some really good, it's really good for bags for structure. What I've also got, which I've been trying out, and I think it's really good stuff, is Scrim. So this is car upholstery interfacing, but it doesn't fuse. You would have to stitch this to the fabric in order to keep it in place. You can see it's quite thin. If I hold that up to the camera, it's quite thin, but it actually does the same sort of thing as this. It's not as thick, but it gives the same appearance of quite a good thickness to a bag. It is also very, very lovely to sew with as well. It doesn't interfere at all with sewing. You don't even need to clip the edges in your seam allowance. This will just go right through everything. Obviously, it's got like a nylon-y side, which looks a bit like car fabric anyway. But it's also got this quilted, sorry about the fluff. It's also got this quilted layer as well. The only thing is you can't fuse it. So it means basting this to your fabric to stop it from sliding about. But this is a lot cheaper than this stuff. And as you can see, this R foam, 18 inches by 58, whereas this can come in 5-6 meter rolls, and it's been incredibly good as interfacing for me. So I'll certainly use that a bit more. You can also double it up to give extra thickness. Again, it will still squidge under the pressure of the feed dogs, so it doesn't interfere at all. I mean, this is just the edge of one, which is where you can see the white line, but it's really, really good stuff. I would recommend it. If you don't want to invest in the R foam, then this stuff is really good. Now, the bag pattern that I'm going to be following is called the Coneflower crossbody bag. I've not made this one before, so I'm going to have a go at this one. This is by Blue Collar Patterns. They're a really good bag making pattern. They do loads and loads of bags. I really like Blue Collar because the construction of the bags is really well thought out, and the instructions are really easy to follow. I'm not going to actually go through how to make this bag because Blue Collar are really good at making their own videos. So if you have a look on YouTube for Blue Collar Patterns, they've got loads of their bags as YouTube videos, and you can follow those through step by step. So although I am going to make this bag, I'm not going to show you how it's actually made as such, because that's Blue Collar videos are much better than what I could do. But I'm going to kind of show you different parts and how I troubleshoot different things, especially if you've not made a bag before. I'll just take you through how I do it. If you use a different bag pattern, some of the principles are exactly the same. So they will be asking you to do some sort of fusing of an interface. So this just gives you an idea of the different types that you can get. With the bags I do for Blue Collar, following the Blue Collar patterns, I'm using lightweight interface, and that's just for the cottons, and I'll show you how I do that. And then I'm using the Scrim, which just seems to work really well. One of the other things that some bags ask for is Peltex. I have not been able to find Peltex. I don't know if that's an American brand. But Peltex is basically a strong fusible or non-fusible. Sometimes it's a sew-in type. So what I've got is something called Pellon. And if I go here, that's this stuff. It is fusible. This is a two-sided fuse, but you don't have to. I mean, you don't have to fuse anything, but it's not as thick as foam, but it's very hard. So this is really good for the bottom of a bag where you would expect to have a lot of structure, you'd want it to be stiff. I mean, some bags use cardboard in the bottoms, but this stuff is really good and really strong, and although it's flexible, it retains its shape, apart from that bit that it's just where I cut it. So I'm going to be using this. For this pattern, it only asks for a small section, and that's just going to go on the bottom. You can sew through it, but most patterns will actually tell you to cut this down so that it doesn't interfere with your seam allowance, but you could actually sew through this if you want. And again, if I zoom, hopefully if that focuses, you can see there's bubbles, those glue dots, and they're on both sides as well. But I mean, that's very stiff. I don't use this all the time, but it's really good for the base of a bag. And for this one, you can see that's going to have a stiff base at the bottom. This is also really good if you were using magnetic snaps or grommets or rivets in bags, and you can put this in, but you can cut off a little section and put this in between your fabrics, so that when you put a grommet through it, it just helps to keep that in place, and it adds an extra layer of thickness for the grommet or for a rivet as well. So it's handy stuff. Again, this is quite expensive, but you're not really using that much of it. So this, I'll be able to make maybe 10 bags using, depending on the pattern. I could probably make about 10 bags with this little box here. The other thing that's really important, no matter what bag pattern that you're following, is to have everything cut out ready. What I have with the blue colour patterns, and this is why I really like them, is each pattern piece lists exactly what you need and what you need to cut. So the first thing that I'm doing, as I say, you can do this with any bag pattern, it's going to tell you this. You can see I've cut everything out ready. This bit usually takes the longest. I think it takes longer to cut everything out than it does to actually sew, but the more preparation you can do at the beginning, the easier it's going to get going through. So for example, one of the bags going to have, I'll do it with this one. This bag, the pattern that I'm going to follow, needs an exterior fabric. It needs a lining on the inside, and it also needs the fusible interfacing. So I've cut ready the fusible interfacing based on this pattern shape. And then I've got all my fabric and my lining ready. So I just kind of pile everything up so that I can mentally tick off that I've got everything before I start. The last thing I want to show you, so that's my cutting table, by the way, in the kitchen. This is also my cutting table, my ironing board. The two main things I'm going to be using on my bag is vinyl, or some people call it vinyl, some people call it leather, faux leather, some people call it leatherette. I call it leatherette. So I've just got some of this, which is like a silver shiny fabric. So it kind of has the impression of it being leather, but it's got a weave on the back, so you know that it's vinyl. It's really strong stuff as well. You don't need to put any interfacing on vinyl or leatherette, because it's already very strong compared to, say, cotton, which is going to fray at the edges. Vinyl doesn't fray at all, and you can cut some really clean lines with vinyl and shape it. It's really, really good, apart from that bit at the top that I missed. The other fabric I'm going to be using for my bag is some of these. Now, someone gave me some swatches for, I think, furniture fabric. They were just little squares, so I have just stitched up all the little squares, just a bit hodgepodge, and then I've cut out the shape that I need for this particular bag. The only thing I've found, if ever you want to use swatches, I mean, they're lovely. I mean, it's good, really good fabric, but the swatches themselves will normally come with a supplier sticker on the back to say the name of the fabric and probably how much it costs if you were, picking furniture or picking a settee. I made the mistake of taking off all of the labels. And what it did for some fabrics is it left a sticky residue. So, I mean, that you can, there is some slight sticky residue. So I won't be making that mistake again. But because of that, because it's got a slight, I've washed this already, but because it's got a slightly sticky layer, I am going to be interfacing this just to stop the glue from going all over my machine. The fabric itself is quite thick, so I wouldn't normally need to interface this, but I'm going to interface this particular type of fabric only because there is so much glue scarring on the back that just is going to damage my machine, so I'm going to be very careful with that. In the next video, I'm just going to show you how I interface and just the ironing process and just some things to watch out for.